I have always been drawn to the stories that make you check the locks twice. The ones told in hushed tones around late-night fires, or found in creased journals detailing encounters that defy all logic. From whispering ghosts in abandoned hallways to shadowy encounters in quiet woods. These are the tales of terrors that lurk just beyond the edge of our vision. So turn the lights down low and get ready to confront what goes bump in the night. You're listening to Don't Whistle to the Wind. Hello, and welcome in, my little horror fiends, to episode 5 of Don't Whistle to the Wind. On this episode, I have the privilege, yet again, of reading another story from my close friend who wrote Eyes on You. So turn the lights down low, get comfy, and turn your volume up while I lull you to sleep or keep you up at night as I read to you the story called The Etiquette of Death. I wanted to put this little notice in there that some of the audio may be distorted, and I do apologize for it. I tried for hours to fix it, but at this rate, it's just going to get uploaded. So thank you, and I really hope you listen to the entire thing because it really is a great story. Remy stepped through the grand iron gates, bringing up the rear of the parade of guests. The storm that had been looming over them finally broke. As the gates clanged shut behind them, Remy couldn't shake the feeling that it sounded like a final verdict. The mansion that stood before them all stood like a monolith at the top of the hill. The masonry of it was quite the marvel. How had this even all been built? The flashes of lightning hurried him up the steps and past the giant wooden entrance doors. The road behind them vanished into darkness. There was a long hallway with only candlelight illuminating the way forward towards another set of doors. The guests walked forward. They had nowhere else to go. As they approached the end, the doors opened by themselves, groaning, showing their age. Inside was an elegant entrance hall, a red carpet draped over the grand staircase, elaborate chandeliers hanging above them, casting long shadows on the marble floor. The air smelled of rotting flowers and old books. The guests exchanged glances at each other, unease, uncertainty on their faces. The doors behind them slammed shut, with a sound that didn't just echo, but lingered. 8 strangers had found themselves standing in this elegant mansion, unsure of what to expect, each with an elegant invitation in their hands. They all stood underneath a stained glass ceiling, some checking their phones, others admiring the decor, others scanning the room, others simply waiting around. And there was Remy, standing closest to the door, just watching the others. Remy was clearly the youngest of the bunch. At around 23, a backpack slung over his formal coat. He looked over the invitation again. It read, "You are cordially invited to a dinner with Lucian Vale, 5 p.m. sharp. Formal attire. Do not disappoint." He tried his best to look the part, but as he studied the other guests, he felt underdressed, severely. A hiss of a match caught his attention. Smoke curled in the air. A woman exhaled slowly, her red lips curving around the cigarette like a secret. She exuded elegance, draped in silk. Each one of her moments was like watching a theatrical performance. This was the type of woman who would never give Remy a single glance, or so he thought. Her eyes flicked across the group. "So," she drawled, "anybody else expecting a murder mystery?" "This is no joke," a voice clipped. "Something's off here." The voice came from a square-jawed, tall, built like a rock man standing at the side of the room. His gaze didn't move from the grand staircases as he spoke. He stood upright, arms crossed like he was guarding a checkpoint. His fingers twitched and curled into a fist. A hand, someone else's, a woman's, gently pressed on his arm in what seemed like a practiced gesture. "Maybe," she said calmly. "We wait before jumping to conclusions." She was small, much smaller than the man at her side. She stood confidently, her dark hair pinned back tightly, a mole beside her lips that stood out like a mark of intent. I'm much more curious as to why we were all chosen. Someone better start talking soon. This whole mystery guest list thing smells like shit. Another voice cut through the hall. It belonged to a woman leaning against one of the columns. Her arms were crossed as well, but not at attention like the other man, rather as to say she'd rather be anywhere else. As if her leather jacket and casual clothing didn't scream that already. Of course, the biker resorts to vulgarity. So charming. A man spoke up, adjusting his glasses with a sigh. He tugged at his collar, but neither of them is wrong. The architecture shifts when you're not looking. I counted 3 arches when I walked in. Now, there's 5. He was right, nobody else had noticed, not until he pointed it out. Anybody else invited under the guise of exclusive access and a story to tell? Another voice asked. He had a notepad in his hand. He grabbed the pencil behind his ear and scribbled something down. He looked around the room and at the group of strangers before him. This feels like a setup. Everything is a setup, spoke another man with a grin, so wide that it nearly cracked his mustache. He gave off a loud presence. Either somebody important or somebody who truly thought he was important. His tuxedo and cane looked like it cost more money than Remy would ever see in his lifetime. Maybe tonight will be a game. Perhaps our lovely host wants to put on a show. He tipped his cane like a toast. In which case, let's hope you're all entertaining. Nobody else spoke for a couple of minutes, the man's words filling the room, until Remy spoke suddenly, breaking his silence. Lucian Vale, you've all heard of him, right? The others glanced at him. The man with the notepad answered. He's supposed to be eccentric. Some say he's a collector. Some say that he's a recluse. Some say that he's a vampire. The rumors are different depending on where you look. That's assuming he's even real, the woman with the mole said softly, shaking her head. He's real, the man beside her responded darkly, certain of it. As if summoned, atop the grand staircase, he appeared. Their darling host, Lucian Vale. Remy noticed him first and pointed. The others all turned as one. Lucian descended slowly as though gravity moved for him. He was dressed in a deep burgundy suit, its fabric glinting like wine under the candlelight. He carried a smile on his face, one that wasn't solely greeting guests, but as if the story could finally begin with him in it. Bienvenue, he purred, his accent honeyed and difficult to place. Somewhere between Paris and a fairy tale. Oh, how magnifique! A full house, on a night so deliciously unpredictable. His excitement seemed almost childlike, but underneath the charm and theatrical tone, something else glimmered. Something that made Remy recoil. You must be wondering why you're here, he said, his arms spreading like a magician about to pull back the curtain. But he already knew the answer. They were. Their silence spoken for them. Uneasy glances flicked between the guests. The stained glass above cast strange hues across their faces. Green on some, crimson on others, and blue, the rest. Lucian raised a crystal glass, filled with something far too thick and dark to be wine. Allow me to ease your anxious minds. This is not a trap. He paused only to widen his grin, all teeth now. Not exactly. A nervous laughter broke out. The guests weren't sure if that was supposed to be a joke. The bespectacled man, ever skeptical, looked at Lucian and spoke. So what is this? A social experiment? A game show? Oui, a game. But not of chance. No. This is a game of truth, of choices, of rules. With a flick of his hand, a figure stepped forward, seemingly out of nowhere, out of thin air. Nobody could even discern if it was human or not. A porcelain mask hid its face, smooth and featureless. It carried a silver tray that it brought over to Lucian and kneeled before him, offering it. Beneath the tray, a scroll. It was ancient and bound in a strip of black ribbon. He turned back to his guests. Now, listen closely. I will explain the rules only once, and when I finish, he unfurled the scroll with a sharp crack of ribbon. The game will have begun. No, I didn't come here to listen to no goddamn rules, the leather jacket-clad woman barked, stepping forward. I didn't come here to dance for some lunatic. She made her way towards the door they came from, shoving Remy out of her way. She gripped the iron handles and pulled. Nothing. She pulled again, harder this time. The door stood firm, like a mountain. What the fuck? Lucian hissed softly, more like a disappointed parent than an angered host. Temper, Shetty, he said, gently, through the mockery in his tone rang clear. You won't win the game with an attitude like that. Let me out of here, you smug freak, she snapped, pounding the doors now with both fists. Open the damn doors. Lucian sighed, almost theatrically. He brought a hand to his heart as though wounded by her lack of civility. I'm afraid no one leaves. Not anymore. His voice turned cold. The house is sealed, the only way out. His smile turned thin, sharp. Is through. He clapped once, bright and crisp, and his tone brightened again. So, he sang, the warmth returning too quickly to be sincere. If you wish to earn your freedom, I suggest you listen closely and follow the rules. But she wasn't done. She turned away from the sealed doors and picked up one of the lavish, high-backed chairs in the room and hurled it at the stained glass window next to the doors. The sound of wood against glass crashed like a thunderclap. The glass held, not even a crack. Lucian sighed long and loud, as if someone had just spilled wine on his favorite rug. Oh really, he muttered, voice dripping with disdain. That simply won't do. He snapped his fingers, and from the edges of the room, where the light didn't quite reach, another two figures emerged. They moved in silence, faces hidden behind the same featureless porcelain mask. They were on her in seconds. Get off of me, she thrashed, as they seized her arms. She kicked and twisted, but they didn't so much as flinch. Help me, she shouted at the others. Anyone? No one moved an inch. The smoking woman's cigarette trembled slightly in her fingers. The bespectacled man averted his eyes. The man with a notepad scribbled furiously. The woman with the mole looked to the man next to her, who remained still, jaw clenched, but unmoving. Lucian descended the final step, adjusting his cuffs with mild disdain. Well, he drawled, savoring the word. After that little interruption, he looked directly at the restrained Isabel, who glared back at him in defiance. Shall we proceed? He raised the scroll again, unfurling it with flair. Thank you, dear guests, for attending this most curated evening, Lucian said, his gaze sweeping slowly across them. Tonight, we shall play a game, one conceived, composed, and conducted by yours truly. He smiled again, different this time, like a man who already knew how the night would end. The game is quite simple, Lucian declared, his voice warm, but insincere as wine gone sour. Obey the rules I provide, and at the end of our little soiree, the doors will open. You will be free to leave. He paused, savoring the silence. Then he winked as though letting them in on a joke only he could understand. But be warned, more rules will be introduced as the evening progresses, and forgetting even one, his words stretched, drawn out like the edge of a blade, would be rather unfortunate. He gave the scroll a reverent tap. Now then, shall we begin with our first rule? Lucian's voice rang with a ceremonial finality. Rule 1. Do not reach for what stirs your hunger, no matter how sweet the allure. A scoff was heard immediately. What the hell does that mean? The smoking woman said, her words venomous. Hunger? Allure? What kind of cryptic bullshit is that supposed to be? She stood with one hip cocked, clearly irritated that anyone would speak to her in riddles. The bespectacled man folded his arms, pacing back and forth. It's a metaphor, or a trick. Psychological bait. The mustached man let out a sharp, dry laugh. No. It's theater. He wants us rattled. I say we find a weak wall and punch our way out. Anyone check the cellar? Are you serious? The man with the notepad looked at him incredulously. He just conjured masked bodyguards out of nowhere. We're not dealing with some eccentric cosplayer. I'm with him, the leather jacket-clad woman nodded. There's something wrong with this place. The doors didn't move, the windows didn't break. And did anyone else notice the hallway we came through is gone? They all stopped to look. Where there had once been 2 giant doors, there was only a seamless wall. It was adorned now with velvet paper and strange portraits of people they didn't recognize. The house was truly changing right before their eyes. Lucian beamed. Ah! Before the feast, he trilled, lifting his arms like a maestro, readying a symphony. We must have our introductions. He clapped his hands once, sharp as a pistol shot. The chandelier above them trembled. Let's begin with our spirited guest, he said, turning to the woman still flanked by the tall, silent beings. With a nod of Lucian's head, the servants released her wordlessly and disappeared, melting back into the mansion shadows like ink soaking into old paper. The woman stood there, simply rubbing her arms where their fingers had gripped too tight. Her dark eyes swept the room once, then found Lucian again. She didn't speak right away. Lucian tilted his head. Don't be shy. Reluctantly, in a steady voice. My name is Isabel. The moment her name slipped from her lips, a sound rose from somewhere within the walls that sounded like fingernails being dragged along stone. It felt like the mansion was reacting to her name, absorbing it in some dark corner, its purpose unknown. Isabel glanced down quickly. Everyone else turned toward the sound. Thank you, Isabel. Lucian's eyes gleamed. Marvelous, he whispered, as if this were exactly what he'd hoped for. He looked at the others, hands clasped in delight. Now then, who's next? Remy shifted his weight from one leg to the other. He didn't want to speak, but something told him it would be worse not to. I'm Remy, he said, his voice thin, the name catching in his throat. The response was immediate. A wail echoed from the far end of the corridor. Remy flinched. The smoking woman rolled her eyes and blew smoke through her nose. Scarlet, she said, flicking ash off of her sleeve. The lights flickered as if in acknowledgement of her name. Marshal, the military man said like an order. Behind him, a single book slid from the shelf and landed with a dull thud on the floor. No one moved to pick it up. Lena, came the woman with the mole, soft but clear. Her eyes stayed on the floor. A portrait on the far wall turned, its painted eyes watching her. Anil, the bespectacled man said, exasperated. He kept his voice low. A gust of air hissed through the fireplace, despite there being nothing lit, no flames, just the sound. Will, said the man with the notepad. You already know that, I assume. A door from some other part of the mansion slammed shut. And lastly, Jack, came the smug declaration from the mustached man. But of course you knew that too. Everyone always does. The wind outside stopped, as if it knew that that was the final name to be heard. The mansion, for its part, remembered, marking each name like a tally, etched not on the walls but somewhere deeper. Lucian gave a little laugh, clapping his hands once again. How delicious. Names are powerful things, you know, like seeds, like keys. His grin didn't fade. If anything, it grew sharper. Well then, he said, lifting his arms. Let's move along, shall we? The house is eager to greet you properly." He gave them a long look and without another word turned on his heel and ascended the staircase, vanishing behind a pair of ornately carved double doors. Nobody followed. Nobody had dared to move an inch or even speak a word. A stillness that invoked pressure rather than peace. And as if summoned by their inaction, the masked servants reappeared. 4 of them this time. One of them gestured toward a door that hadn't been there a moment ago. None of the servants said a word, simply expected them to go through. The guests could tell resistance would have been futile. Whoever or whatever these servants were would have ensured that. Not that there was anywhere else for them to go either. And so, the 8 of them stepped on through the door, one by one. Remy felt his mouth dry as they entered a new chamber. The servants closed the door behind them with an unnatural silence. Inside was what looked like a dining room, but wasn't. Whatever this was, it could have only been described as theater. The air was heavy with a sweet perfume that was enough to make them choke. A wide circular table of obsidian was at the center. The moment they stepped forward, the candelabras ignited in sequence, each one illuminating the card in front of each seat, their names written in golden script. But there was something else. Each seat had a second chair, placed intimately close beside it, and in those seats sat figures. They sat motionless as if they'd been waiting for a long time. Remy blinked at the form beside his chair. He knew those soft eyes and kind hands. Someone he hadn't seen since sophomore year, James. His first kiss, his first heartbreak. He hadn't thought of him in years, and yet, here he was, like he had been pulled right out of his memories. Still wearing the same worn denim jacket from that rainy October afternoon in the campus coffee shop. Remy's breath hitched. The sight of him was still devastating. Across the table, Lena's face went pale at the sight of a woman seating silently beside her own chair, a sultry smile on the woman's face. Lena's face flushed, as if in remembrance of her own feelings towards her, from fear to admiration to idolization. Marshall noticed. He said nothing, but he couldn't hide how he tightened his jaw. Scarlett's cigarette froze halfway to her lips. The figure beside her chair was her, or rather another version of her, one that emanated feelings she hadn't felt about herself in years. Her other self was sultry and composed, like the woman in old Polaroids Scarlett had torn in half. She was identical to Scarlett down to the cigarette hallway, to her lips, except for the smile on her face, something Scarlett hadn't seen on herself in ages. The sight of the woman sitting next to his chair had made Will stop breathing completely. She was luminous, not just beautiful in the way a stranger is to someone, but beautiful in her familiarity. Dark curls fall over her shoulder, her freckled nose wrinkled just slightly, in the same way it used to whenever she'd laugh. She looked at him. Her eyes were full of trust like before. Her hand outstretched, calling out to him to come closer. It almost felt to Will that she wanted to say something that had been left unsaid, but she couldn't. Before Will could react, before anybody else could, they all heard Lucian's voice. It came from the edges of the ceiling without any true source. "Each of you," he purred, "is seated beside someone or something you desire." The words wrapped around each of them like tendrils. A whispered word, a stolen glance, a remembered touch of the hand. But beware, his voice sharpened. Should temptation triumph, the illusion will rot, and you will be embraced by your longing. "What kind of sick joke is this?" Scarlett whispered. Her double raised a cigarette to her lips and exhaled a slow curl of smoke. Scarlett swallowed. No one answered her, because no one was listening, because they all were staring. Not at each other, but at the figures seated beside them. Remy looked back at James, who had shifted. He sat with his legs crossed now, grinning just as he did that one rainy day, freshman year, back when things had been much easier. His eyes still held that reckless sparkle that had pulled him in the first place. "Hey, Rem," he said casually, as if no time had passed at all. Remy's hand twitched forward. Just one step. Just one, he thought to himself. Jack stood very still. His gaze lingered on the man beside him. The man beside him was striking, tall, and dressed in a navy uniform that practically gleamed. The kind of beauty Jack had always flirted with at a safe distance. But this one leaned forward, his eyes unreadable. And suddenly, every fantasy Jack had buried under bravado stared back at him, made flesh. Lena tried her best to keep from looking at the woman, but she couldn't. Her mere presence felt like a gravitational pull. She always had this way of making her feel like she was the smartest person in the room, until she didn't. But that didn't matter in the moment. Right now, she felt the way she did before, the same warmth lingering in the air between them. Nothing short of magnetic. Marshall hovered nearby, his attention finally away from Lena and that woman. His companion was a younger version of himself. He was dressed in a crisp uniform that was adorned with polished metals. He had a smile on his face which Marshall remembered. It was one that still believed in honor and oaths. It made him sick to his stomach. Isabel stood away from the table as if distance would keep her own companion from grabbing her attention. It didn't. She couldn't help but stare at the child sitting in the seat, a little girl, no more than 6 years old. She had the same auburn eyes, the same dark hair, the same gap in her teeth visible when she smiled. The little girl grinned wide, innocently, and lifted her hand toward Isabel without hesitation. Isabel bit her lip and looked away. Anil said nothing. He just watched the woman sitting next to his chair. Another academic. She looked out of place in this room, as if she belonged behind a lectern. Not here. Her hair was tied back, her glasses smudged, her fingers stained with ink. She sat quietly, engrossed in her work. He opened his mouth just barely, hoping to say something, but the words caught in his throat. Everyone was too caught up in their companions that nobody noticed what was happening to Will. He, too, was staring at his companion, but this was different than the rest. While the others were struggling with their temptation, Will was giving in. Whoever she was staring back at him. She tilted her head and mouthed something to him that no one else could hear. Will whispered her name. Ramona. And he reached out. Their hands touched. Nobody noticed until it was already happening. A crack rang out like the sound of a balloon popping, sharp and quick. Remy turned just in time to see Will's face contort. The woman had begun to decay rapidly, her skin sliding off her bone, hair wilting like scorched petals. But her arms only pulled him closer and tighter. Will did his best to pull away, but her embrace only deepened. Her mouth curled into a grotesque smile. Will screamed as she held on to him until something gave way. Her flesh seeped into his eyes as his eyes bulged and his body spasmed. The distinct sound of bone snapping echoed in the room. Their bodies fused together. His final scream rang out until it became nothing more than a choked gurgle. Where Will once stood was now just a crumpled shell of ashes and bone. Like magic, a small ivory plaque appeared on the table beside them. In ornate cursive, it read, "Will Morton." He reached and was unmade. No one moved. Scarlett's cigarette dropped from her fingers, burning out on the floor. Lena stumbled backwards, knocking over a chair in the process. Marshall caught her before she hit the ground, but his eyes were fixed on the plaque. Anil sat down, shock clear on his face. Remy couldn't look away, even with James, still smiling at him in the corner of his eye. "What?" Isabel croaked, her voice raw. What the fuck was that? Lucian's voice filled the room once more, not from walls or the shadows, just everywhere. Such a shame. The first course always tempts the weakest appetites. As soon as Lucian finished his sentence, the candles went out in unison, and they were all left in darkness. The doors from which they had entered opened again. The masked servants were nowhere to be seen, not that they needed to be. The remaining guests didn't need to be guided this time. They understood now. They were no longer guests. They were players in a game they could no longer pretend was anything else. No one wanted to be the first to step through the doors, but considering what had just happened to Will, erased so brutally, so swiftly, nobody wanted to stay behind. Scarlet was the first to move. Her heels clicked against the marble floor. One by one, the others followed, leaving the chamber in silence, not bothering to look at their companions still seated at the table, nor at each other. The door didn't not lead them back to the entrance hall. Instead, it took them to a new chamber, one that stretched unnaturally long. They entered a distorted dining hall which had a painting on the ceiling above them. It depicted people, their open mouths devouring anything that could fit, all seated at a feast set for kings. It was hunger immortalized. In the center of the room was a monstrous dining table, carved out of block oak, long enough to seat dozens, but instead, it had exactly 7 places, one for each of them. Each place gleamed with antique silverware, polished crystal, and plates that reeked of temptation. The scent was overwhelming. Roasted meats that shimmered with a golden glaze, candied roots that shone like jewels, bowls of sweet cream, berries, and bread, goblets brimmed with wine. Remy's stomach twisted at the sight. Scarlet's eyes narrowed. Lena muttered, "I don't like this." And at the head of the table, Lucian. He was already seated, wine glass in hand, waiting for them. He didn't speak, and merely flicked his wrists gracefully. His gesture guided their eyes toward a polished brass plaque standing tall in the center of the table that read, "Consume only what you are served. Seconds are for the damned." The meaning of this was obvious. The consequences didn't need to be stated. They knew firsthand what would happen if they dared break it. The guests took their seats, slowly. When the final chair creaked, the doors behind them, and a soft chime like silver bells at a funeral echoed from nowhere, the silver clutches before them all lifted themselves from the plates, as if guided by invisible hands. Remy looked down at his plate. A simple meal laid there, composed of a single slice of buttered toast, an apple, and a soft-boiled eggs. To the others it may not have looked like much, but for him, the meal not only stirred his hunger but his memories as well. Isabel's plate had a piece of rare steak, its blood pooling on the plate. She scowled and pushed the plate away, while Anil's dish looked as if it had been stolen from a Michelin-starred restaurant. Layered saffron pasta with mushrooms that glistened with cream. "This is psychological warfare," he muttered, yet he still picked up his fork. Jack chuckled nervously, staring at a towering trio of confections comprised of candied lemon tart, chocolate mousse, and sugared cherries. "This one's gonna hurt." Scarlet simply continued smoking, her oysters untouched. She eyed them as if they were poisoned. Marshall said nothing. On his plate was a military meal, basic rations placed on a tin tray. He ate it all, like he was following orders. Lena raised the spoonful of vegetable soup to her lips. She stopped midway to smell it, as if ensuring this wasn't some trick. Lucian just watched them all, an unreadable smile on his face. Minutes passed. No one dared to reach for the warm bread at the table's center. Nor did they pour from the ornate wine bottles. They were all focused on their meals and watching one another. There was no denying the food was exquisite. Remy caught himself chewing slower, as if he was trying to savor the meal. The apple was impossibly crisp, better than any apple he had had in his life before. The toast felt as if it had been sliced from some divine loaf. The butter rich with salt and a whisper of honey. He finished it all and sat back. The plate was spotless, just some breadcrumbs of the toast, a polished apple core, and a smear of yellow on the porcelain. And yet, his stomach roared for more, like he hadn't eaten anything in days. He wasn't the only one feeling this way. Anil sat across from him, breathing slower, trying too hard to look casual. Scarlett's foot tapped in a nervous rhythm beneath the table. Isabel stared down at her plate, doing her best to show restraint, and Lucian saw it all. He rose from his chair with a slow grace. He began to pace the table, his fingers trailing along the backs of each of their chairs, lingering behind them just long enough. "So obedient now," he murmured, his voice soft, and if they didn't know any better, it sounded almost admiring. "How noble, how restrained. A toast to self-control." He plucked a goblet from the table, one with wine dark as ink, and raised it. "You're learning. That's good. But you know what I found?" He approached Scarlett as he spoke. He watched, but he spoke to all of them. "Restraint is always temporary. Hunger is patient, and hunger always wins." Scarlet blew smoke towards his face. Lucian grinned. He turned on his heel and made his way back to his seat. All eyes were on him. With a snap of his fingers, the room was filled up by his masked servants in seconds. They all appeared from the shadows, once again carrying silver platters for each of his guests. A second course. The servants lifted the lids and dispersed back into the shadows as quickly as they appeared. Before each of them, there was a new feast, but this time, it was more than just food. It was tailored. Their favorites made perfect. For Remy, it was his grandmother's cinnamon rolls, still steaming as if they'd just come out of her old oven. For Lena, it was a saffron rice dish, just the same as it had been on that particular night. For Marshall, it was a steak identical to the one from Prague. The last night, it all made sense. "You've earned a reward," Lucian said gently, as if offering kindness. "A taste. Just one. Surely that won't break the rules." No one reached for the food. Anil leaned back with his arms folded. "Nice try." Lucian laughed. "You don't trust me?" Remy swallowed hard. His mouth watered involuntarily. But he didn't speak, nor did he look at the rolls again. He couldn't trust himself. "You've all become so very disciplined. I'm impressed," Lucian said, tone turning brittle. The temperature in the room dropped instantly as the candles flickered blue. Lucian's smile faded. "But if temptation won't work," he said, almost to himself, "perhaps pressure will." He clapped once and the platter snapped shut. In an instant, the entire room transformed. The lavish dining room was gone. The guests found themselves standing now in some new chamber where the walls were stained crimson, and they pulsed like to the beat of a heartbeat. The air in here was sweet and thick, almost tempting to taste. And in front of them, a banquet. Just for them. Remy staggered backward a step. Before him stood his grandmother's kitchen. Not a replica, not an illusion. Her kitchen. From the magnets on the fridge, laid out to spell all smiles, to the yellow curtains, down to the cracked tile near the stove. On the counter, a stack of those golden cinnamon rolls exactly as she used to make. And in the blink of an eye, he saw her. His grandmother, impossibly alive, smiling at him, the same soft and tired smile, the one full of love. She placed another roll on the plate on the counter. "Eat, baby," she whispered, the same tone of sweetness and love as before. "You look so thin." He shook his head violently. "This isn't real. This isn't real." Across the crimson chamber, Lena was rooted in place, her eyes wide. She couldn't believe it. Her dorm room surrounded her. It looked exactly like that winter after finals. Dimly lit, papers strewn about, a stack of old textbooks on her desk. She remembered how sick she was that week, how exhausted she felt from exam after exam. A chipped bowl of chicken soup laid before her. She could smell the ginger and lemon in the air. Exactly how her mother used to make. "Eat, little sparrow," the voice behind her said, soft and familiar. "You deserve comfort." Meanwhile, Scarlett's scene found her inside of a bar, one from a hazy memory. She couldn't remember the name, but the scenery was exact. The same low red lighting. Faceless guests sat at the booths. A familiar song played on the jukebox. A martini glass sat on the counter. A man sat beside her. She couldn't make out his face, but she knew him. Familiar in the way someone can be when you've shared a bed, a secret, and a lie. "Drink with me," he said, stroking her shoulder. "Just one more night. One more taste." Marshall found himself in a war tent. Rain and wind poured outside, shuddering the tent. On the tray before him were cold, gray rations. But next to it, a rare steak, the exact same cut from that night in Prague. He could never forget that night, the night he left, the night he regretted to this day. In front of him sat Lena. Not the one here tonight, but the one from that night. The one he wished he'd never left. "You could have stayed," her voice, not quite hers, said. "You can now." Jack found himself inside of an old cabin that smelled like chili. Not a pre-made or a store-bought chili, but the one that he and his brother, on their yearly trips to that cabin in the mountains, the one their dad left them. Memories of them laughing, getting drunk, and sharing bad ideas flooded his mind. He smiled. "You gonna stare at it all night or actually eat it?" His brother's voice pulled him out of his thoughts. On the other side of the small, weathered table was Marcus, a spoonful of chili in his mouth. He dropped the chili and took a step back. Jack knew it was impossible, and yet, there he was, just like in his thoughts. The smell of the chili lingered. "Come on, man, just like before. Share a meal with me again. You owe me that much," Marcus said. Jack squeezed his eyes shut. "You're not real." "Doesn't matter," Marcus whispered. "I'm here now." But Jack couldn't move or speak anymore. He just stood there while his brother smiled at him. And what he could only hope was forgiveness. Anil found himself in front of a pristine chef's counter. The kitchen was spotless. He had always taken pride in how meticulous he could be about cleanliness. On the counter lay his signature dish. It looked immaculate. Next to it, a piece of paper cut from a newspaper that had a review of his dish and gave it a glowing review. The same exact cutout that he had framed back in his apartment. He caught himself before grabbing the cutlery. Isabel was somewhere else entirely. Not a room, but sitting by a campfire in the woods. It was the middle of the night and she found herself alone, with a thick scent of roasting meat. The only sounds came from the cracking of the fire. Her stomach grumbled. Lucian stood in the center of it all, a shadow among all the illusions. His grin was no longer pleasant. Rather, it was predatory. "Let's make something clear," he said, voice cutting across every version of the room. "This is not about food. This is not about meat, or wine, or sweets." The illusions trembled slightly as he paced. "This is about need, that gaping hole in your soul you try to stuff with indulgence and call it survival." His eyes swept over each of them. "The rule remains, but this time," he paused. "Come. Now all you have to do is reach." Nobody moved. Some of them had tears in their eyes. Some had sweat coming down their brows. The scent of cinnamon swirled around Remy's head like a drug. Seconds dragged on like years. Each of them did their best to stand firm. Even Marshall's iron frame looked like it was bending under the weight of a memory and want. "I will break one of you," Lucian said quietly. And if I don't, this room will. Isabel finally moved, not towards the illusion, but away. She shook her head as she backed up slowly. No. Scarlett dropped her cigarette and crushed it beneath her heel. Anil stepped back from the counter and shoved his hands in his pockets. Remy forced himself to look at the rolls, at the woman pretending to be his grandmother, and whispered, "You're not real," before turning away. One by one, they resisted. No one reached. No one broke. Lucian's smile faded. "Impressive," he said bitterly, and the illusion shattered like glass. In an instant, the kitchen, the tent, the bar, the forest, all gone. They were now in a plain gray, empty chamber, and Lucian sat at the far wall with his hands behind his back. "So that's how it's going to be?" he asked, voice now low and tight. "Very well." He stepped toward the door, then paused, glancing over his shoulder. "The next room won't offer you what you love." He opened the door at the end of the room. None of them could see anything but darkness beyond it. "Next sin," he said. "Next rule. No more comfort." And then he vanished into the black. No one followed. Not right away. They all just stood in silence with only the faint echo of Lucian's receding footsteps. Scarlett was the first to speak. We made it out." She wiped sweat from her brow. "He didn't break us." Remy looked at the others. Marshall's broad shoulders still slumped forward. Lena's lips were pressed together, a shadow of terror behind her eyes. Anil adjusted his glasses with trembling fingers. Isabel leaned against the wall with her arms crossed. She was the only one that seemed undeterred. Jack simply traced the edge of the doorway with a trembling fingertip. If that was gluttony, what the hell comes next? His voice cracked. They all shared the same thought, unspoken but unanimous. How much worse could it get? No one answered. Instead, they squared their shoulders, some out of courage, some out of sheer inertia, and stepped forward into the darkness together. The chamber hissed open like a mouth unsealing. Inside, all trace of the mansion's old-world opulence was gone. The walls were seamless silver and curved like the inside of a vault. In the center, a massive hoard of treasure, piled high with gleaming objects, gold bars, bejeweled goblets, strings of pearls, stacks of crisp currency, and between the piles were weapons, food, keys, tools, anything one might want, anything one might need. As they all readied themselves inside, the vault door behind them closed and sealed them in the chamber. Lucian stepped from the shadows, clapping slowly. The sound echoed strangely in the vault. "Bravo," he said with fake warmth. "You all survived the last room. I admit I'm impressed. Disappointed, but impressed." No one said a word. Instead, a digital counter on the far wall ticked upward. 1, 2. Lucian circled the hoard, fingers drifting across the spoils like a man bored with his toys. "This room," he purred, "is simple. A test of appetite, of greed." He stopped at the center, hands outstretched like a ringmaster presenting his final act. "Rule 3. Take what you can. The one with the most at the end will be the only one allowed to live." They all gasped in disbelief. "No," Lena whispered. A digital counter on the far wall turned on and began to tick upward. 1. "Yes," Lucian snapped. "It's a contest now. A game of gain. Whoever claims the most by the time the clock stops wins. The rest, well, let's just say the mansion does not house mercy." The timer ticked. 2, 3. For a moment, they just stared as if expecting the rule was a joke. "Wait." Scarlett said. How do we know he's... Lucian interrupted her. Tick-tock. 5. No one moved. He's lying, she said under her breath. 6. Jack scoffed. I'm not betting my life on that. He shoved past Remy with a bark of laughter and lunged into the nearest pile of treasure. That was the breaking point. Remy bolted to another corner and began snatching up coins and small trinkets. Scarlett moved next, clutching gold chains and slipping them into her boots, coat, anywhere they'd fit. Marshall stayed still for a moment longer before moving with purpose, gathering up a ceremonial dagger and a gem-encrusted compass. 10. Brilliant, Anil muttered, adjusting his glasses. Like rats in a maze. He crouched and grabbed an antique tome and 2 chalices. Fine. I can play too. Lena knelt beside a glass box of jeweled insects and scooped them out one by one. Meanwhile, Isabel didn't move. She simply watched the chaos unfolding in front of her. 15. Remy collided with Anil at a pedestal, both reaching for the same golden figurine. That's mine, Remy snapped, gripping it. Anil stared at him like an equation he found beneath him. Remy, unless your name's engraved on it, I'm afraid possession is 10/10 of survival. Remy and Anil clashed at a pedestal. That's mine, Remy said sharply, fingers on a golden figurine. Nearby, Lena reached for a string of pearls in Scarlett's hand. Scarlett's head snapped towards her. Back off, sweetheart, she hissed, or I'll feed you that mole of yours. Lena snarled, try it. They tugged the pearls in opposite directions until Marshall intervened, grabbing both women by the arms. Enough. We're not animals. Jack, meanwhile, was piling items in front of him like he were assembling a dragon's horde. Keep fighting, little sheep, he chuckled. Makes it easier for me to win. Overcompensating, Jack? Anil said without even looking up at him. You wish, Jack spat while stuffing a ruby idol into his pocket. 30. 31. We don't know if this is the real test. Marshall shoved a decorated box under his arm as he spoke. Anil snorted. Of course it is. Lucian wants us to act like this, like pigs in a trough. Remy muttered, I am not dying over a fork with a ruby on it. He still pocketed it anyway. Scarlett had found a satchel and was cramming it full of small treasures. Lena dragged a ceramic urn from the corner, slipping on scattered coins as she staggered backwards. And Isabel still hadn't moved. She was still just watching everything unfold from the front of the room. 40. The overhead lights stuttered before flickering red. Their shadows stretched and clawed along the walls. They looked like scavengers. Not human. Not anymore. Lucian watched it all unfold like theater. Fascinating, he murmured. How fast survival curdles into selfishness. 45. The ticking quickened. It grew louder, like a countdown inside of their chests. They were panting now, their skin slick with sweat. The room stank of fear. Jack was nearly vibrating, high on hoarded wealth, clutching a gold-plated violin like it could save him. I win, he muttered. I win. I win. Scarlett knocked over a tray of crystal flutes and began digging through shards. Her hands quickly began to bleed. She didn't notice, nor did she care. Anil backed himself into a corner with his arms wrapped around his lute like a fortress. Marshall crouched, his coat bulging with trinkets, like a soldier preparing to bolt. Remy trembled, both hands full of gilded nonsense. Is this enough? He whispered. Is this enough? Lena was pacing now, whispering numbers under her breath. Isabel's eyes landed on a single silver pocket watch, abandoned near the edge of Anil's pile. She made a move toward it, then stopped herself, her hands curled at her sides. 1 minute. The timer blared and everything stopped. Lucian stepped forward, clapping like a maestro. His applause echoed sharply in the silence. "Well," he said, "you certainly didn't disappoint." Everyone exhaled at once. Jack stumbled forward. "Told you. Look at this haul. I beat all of them." Lucian turned to him and his massive hoard of treasure that clearly outshined anyone else's. "Congratulations," he purred. "You are the richest man in the room." Jack breathed out, a big grin on his face. "I did it. The floor vanished beneath him. A trapdoor opened up like a mouth mid-scream, and Jack dropped. One flailing second, one strangled scream, and gold cascading into the void after him like an offering. Then silence. The others froze. Marshall's fists clenched. Scarlett's cigarette slid from her lips and hit the floor with a soft hiss. A placard rose from the space Jack had stood in, elegant and cruel. It read, "Jack Foster. The cost of more." Lucian turned to the rest. "Ah," he said smoothly. "Did I say survive? My apologies. I meant the opposite." His voice oozed with satisfaction and his grin sharpened. "You see, true greed is not about winning. It's about taking too much. You misunderstood the rule. The greediest is the one who perishes. The rest of you," he waved a hand lazily, "showed restraint, or fear, or just weren't quite greedy enough." He eyed Isabel. Isabel didn't look back at him. She simply stared at where Jack had vanished. Lucian stepped backward toward a slowly parting door. "Onward, my friends. The next course waits. And envy is a beast that never eats alone." And he was gone. The silence that followed was heavier than the ticking clock had ever been. Scarlett broke it. "After some time, he's not playing a game." "No," Marshall said. "He's playing us." The door had groaned open as if it was goading them to enter. Beyond, the corridor dimmed. The metal walls bled into a new chamber. The 6 of them stepped in, and the door clicked behind them. The air here was still, but heavy with the scent of lavender oil. This room was unlike the others. They stepped into a circle, a medium-sized circular space lined wall to wall with tall, gilded mirrors. A hall of reflections. The only light came from the soft glow emanating from the mirrors themselves. Slowly, a plaque rose from a velvet pedestal at the room's center with a soft chime. "Do not long for another's reflection, no matter how much more it clearly shines." Lucian's voice slithered in, like poison curling into their ears. "In this room, you will each see yourselves, and who you wish you were, the truth and the lie. But beware, covet the reflection of another, and the mirror will decide what's real and what's left behind." Scarlett lit another cigarette with trembling fingers. "I hate mirrors." Remy kept close to the entrance. "Is it literal? We can't look at each other's reflections?" "No," Lena said quietly. "It's not about looking. It's about wanting." Like clockwork, 6 spotlights appeared, each shining on a mirror, one for each guest. Slowly they stepped into the light. Each mirror rippled for just a couple of seconds. As Isabel looked at the mirror, an image started to take shape. She was sitting at a kitchen table as warm morning light filled the room. Across from her sat someone else. She couldn't see their face, but they were laughing. Not at her, at something she'd said. The Isabel in the mirror was smiling, not forced or fake, but a genuine smile on her face. It looked like she didn't need to fight to exist here. She hated how much she wanted that quiet, unguarded life. It didn't look like surrender, and more like freedom. Marshall's reflection depicted him not as a soldier, but as a leader of peace. He stood at a podium, a Medal of Honor pinned to his chest, speaking out to a quiet crowd. He was calm, his purpose was clear, and the crowd listened as if what he had to say mattered. This version of him had no blood on his hands. Marshall simply watched, stone-faced, doing his best to push down the emotions daring to bubble up. Scarlett's mirror showed her as even more radiant than she was now. Her beauty and her youth hadn't been slowly eroding by smoke or vanity. She sat in a sunlit room doing something she hadn't done in years, reading a book. She was alone and at peace. There was no one to impress, no one to judge her, no one to conquer. There was only quiet, contentment, and a sense of belonging that she never had. Defiantly, Scarlett inhaled another puff of her cigarette. Remy's mirror showed him giving a lecture to a crowded hall. The people listened in admiration. This version of him was confident and accomplished. There were people behind me, mostly colleagues and professors. He didn't mind those. What surprised him was his father standing behind him, his hand on his shoulder. That version of Remy looked like someone who had pride in themselves, and had finally been allowed to take up space. Remy just relished the view. Lena's reflection showed her with her name displayed and honored across textbooks, research labs, and awards. She stood on a stage accepting a medal with a stunned smile. There was a certificate embossed in gold that she had been handed. They gave her the podium expecting a speech, and she rose to the occasion. Nobody dared interrupt her or speak over her. Everyone simply listened. Lena caught herself smiling at the reflection. Anil just stared at his mirror at first. He was staring at himself, the same glasses, the same suit, the same furrowed brow. For a second, he began to believe nothing was going to happen. Then his reflection smiled, and he knew in that instant. He knew they were not one and the same. The smile on the reflection's face was gentle, like that of someone at peace. They had softer eyes, rested shoulders, a ring on his finger, and the part that caught Anil the most, a child clinging to his coat. This version of him had a home, had friends, had love. Anil stepped forward, taking a breath like it hurt. You wanted all that at once, didn't you? Lucian cooed from nowhere. Told yourself you were above it. That intellect outweighed intimacy. That being brilliant was enough. Anil whispered, so softly only the mirror heard. I didn't mean to be alone. He reached out. Scarlett caught the motion and snapped, Anil, don't! Anil recoiled at the sound of her voice, but his fingers had already touched the glass. He couldn't move his hand from the mirror, like it had been fused to the glass. The mirror roared awake. The reflection of him inside smiled from ear to ear, its eyes turned black. It leaned forward and brought its hand towards Anil's. Their fingertips touched. Instantly, the mirror took him. Anil's body folded inward like cloth sucked into a void. The surface of the mirror shimmered once and went still. Etched along the frame of the mirror in soft cursive, Anil Mudahar reached for what was never his, claimed by what he imagined. Remy stepped back. No one spoke. Lucian's voice eventually broke the silence. He spoke almost as if gloating. Isn't it cruel that we never envy what we deserve, only what was never meant for us? Another mirror shattered on its own. The spotlight in front of Anil's mirror went out. The door ahead unlatched with a sigh, and the doors opened, spilling warm golden light into the chamber. They could see into the next room. It looked gentle, different from what they've come to expect so far. The five of them hesitantly stepped forward into the next room. There was no plaque, no cryptic riddle, nothing that screamed death in the room. Lucian's voice flowed into the room like honey and tea. Congratulations, my tenacious little guest. You've made it farther than most. The man himself materialized into the room out of thin air. sipping something deep and red from a crystal flute. He smiled. No rules, no riddles, just rest. Behind him, the room was decadence incarnate. Velvet chairs arranged like petals around a low table of actual food. A roaring fireplace crackled in a hearth carved with cherubs. A grand piano played itself in the corner, filling the air with soft, lilting notes. Shelves of old books, some board games and puzzles stacked neatly beside them, and a cart of drinks glittered beneath polished crystal. Lucian gestured with theatrical flourish. You've earned it. Sit. Relax. Or if you're eager to test fate again, the next door is right over there. He pointed toward a velvet-draped archway. I don't trust it, Isabel muttered, folding her arms. No shit, Scarlett said, eyeing the pastries on the table. She lit another cigarette, dragging smoke through her teeth. But if this is a trap, it's the softest one yet. Remy stepped forward first, slowly. He said no rule, just rest. He looked back at the others. Maybe it's real, or maybe it's just a breath before the next plunge. Lucian raised his glass in a silent toast and vanished like mist. One by one they gave in. Not to comfort, to exhaustion. Marshall sat with a grunt, wiping his face with a handkerchief that had long lost its starch. Lena settled across from him. Scarlett sprawled out in one of the armchairs, like a cat claiming her throne. Well, if we die, at least I'll be comfortable. Isabel stood by the fire, arms still crossed, refusing to remove her jacket. Remy poured himself a glass of water, his hand shaking slightly as he did. The room, for all its beauty, pulsed with a strange stillness. The fire crackled, the piano played, and time seemed to slow. They started to talk, not about the situation they found themselves in, but about what came before tonight. I used to love crosswords, Marshall murmured, thumbing the corner of a puzzle book with the same reverence he might show a prayer. My dog, Lena said softly, used to curl up by the fire like that. Just like that. Scarlet blew smoke in a lazy ring. Always thought I'd go out glamorously. Pearls, gunfire, maybe a scandal. She gave a half laugh, dry and brittle. Not like this. As they spoke, not one of them noticed they weren't alone. It had always been there, coiled behind the tall chairs near the shelves. Crouched beneath the piano's shadow, like spilled ink, it made not a sound. It didn't draw breath. It simply watched them. Its shape was more suggestion than a body, a hint of teeth blooming in places no mouth belonged. It waited. I haven't sat like this since before everything, Remy said, the weight of exhaustion softening his voice. Maybe Lucian grew a conscience, Scarlett said, curling her legs into the chair. This could be a twisted sense of mercy. Marshall, from the floor near Lena's feet, grunted. There's no mercy in war. He paused for a second before speaking again. But even soldiers get a ceasefire. Isabel stood closest to the door, her eyes never straying far from the velvet-draped archway. Her jaw clenched tighter with every soft laugh the others gave. She hadn't spoken, hadn't given into the room yet. Time moved strange in the parlor. Minutes melted into something softer. Remy found himself staring at the fire, his thoughts doling. Scarlett stopped smoking, her cigarette dying between two unmoving fingers. Even Marshall's eyes slipped shut for a moment. Even Isabel eventually sat. And that's when it moved. From behind the bookshelves, the thing unfolded. In movements that suggested unraveling, like wet tapestry falling apart midair. Its limbs dragged across the carpet without weight, without sound. It was Isabel who saw it first. Horrified, she said, "What the?" The thing struck before anyone could rise. It slammed into the room with a wet schlunk. A maw opened, not with sound, but absence. It seized Lena's leg. She screamed and kicked. Her chair toppled. The spell broke. Chaos snapped into place like a sprung trap. Remy lunged, grabbing Lena's arms and hauling her back with every shred of strength in his frame. Her boot slipped. Her coat tore, but she came free. Marshall barreled forward with a raw shout, swinging for the creature, but his fist meant nothing. Scarlet stumbled backwards over her own chair. The piano exploded into discordant keys as it flipped onto its side, scattering notes like bones. The doors slammed shut with a resounding boom. Lucian's voice, silk spun with mockery, seeped from nowhere and everywhere at once. Oh dear, so many limbs, so little time. The fire pulsed, the lights stuttered, the thing hissed, but it made no sound. It coiled again like a predator at rest. You did so well, Lucian crooned. Earned yourselves a room to rest. And rest you did. A little too well. His voice slithered across their skin like oil. A new plaque shimmered into being above the mantel reading, "Let no comfort claim your will. To surrender to stillness is to invite the creeping rot." Scarlet spun in place. What? You said there was no rule. Lucian sighed as if wounded. Ah, but that was the rule. Sloth is subtle. It doesn't tempt with pleasure. It tempts with peace. The lie that you've survived, that you're safe. He chuckled low, almost fond. The challenge is simple. Now, survive. This room, this creature, for 1 full hour. No way, Remy gasped. That's not possible. Oh, but it is, Lucian purred. You'll find Sloth doesn't like to be rushed or resisted. The creature struck again, its limb shot out, cracking through the wooden leg of a nearby chair with a sickening crunch. Lena shrieked as it grazed her coat. Scarlet caught her and dragged her to safety. They scattered, flinging open cabinets, flipping tables, anything to hide behind or shield themselves with. Remy pounded on the sealed door until his fist bruised. Marshall grabbed a wine bottle, smashing it into a jagged weapon. Scarlet armed herself with the stem of a broken flute. The creature slunk back into shadow, its hunger deterred. The room went quiet again. The fire dimmed. The hour had begun. Lucian's voice hummed one last time. You should have moved on when I offered, but instead, you made yourselves at home. And Sloth, patient and ancient, had all the time in the world. The parlor rotted around them. Color drained from the velvet and wood. Shadows swelled into the seams, bruising every edge. The scent of clove and citrus curdled into mildew and ash. None of them felt like they had a chance to even breathe. Marshall crouched with Lena behind the overturned piano. Remy was curled under a gutted armchair near the far wall. Scarlet clutched the broken flute like a knife, her back pressed to a cabinet. Isabel stood by the hearth, fists clenched, a black smear blooming across her coat where a tendril had touched her. The room held its breath. The silence was its weapon now. The creature moved, but only at the edges, subtle as a breath. Sometimes the fire cracked just enough to make them flinch. Sometimes a limb would emerge, long and silent, only to retreat again. It wasn't attacking. Not yet. It was measuring them. Scarlet whispered, her voice shaking. It's playing with us. Good, Isabel muttered. Means it's not hungry yet. Remy shifted. The floorboard groaned. In a blur, the thing lashed out, a streak of darkness. With a splintering crack, the chair where Remy had been exploded. Remy was hiding beneath. He yelped, rolled away just in time as it splintered into pieces. The thing vanished again into the walls this time. It didn't want to kill. Not yet. It wanted them exhausted. They tried everything, stacking furniture, blocking vents, keeping in constant motion, but Sloth always found them. Remy's arm split open near his elbow, blood slicking his fingers. Scarlet had a gash along her ribs that soaked her shirt dark. Marshall limped, his side mottled with bruises from when the creature slammed him into the wall, trying to pry him from Lena, but they endured. Seconds crawled like insects over skin. Every tick of the unseen clock felt like a punishment until finally, a click, a sound soft as a breath. The door to the next room creaked open on its own, exhaling stale air into the ruin of the parlor. Lucian's voice curled into the room. "Well done, darlings. You didn't fall asleep, though you came terribly close." The lights sputtered. The fire guttered. The creature moved, almost imperceptibly fast. A howl of wind, without wind. Lena screamed. The thing struck like a wave. Marshall grabbed her hand. He had her. For 1 second, he had her. And then, she was gone. Torn from him with a force that ripped through bone and memory. The sound that came from Lena wasn't a scream. It was the rupture of something sacred. The sound of a life being unwritten. "Lena!" Marshall roared, lunging towards Sloth, but Scarlet grabbed his coat, yanking him backward through the door as Remy stumbled past Isabel, who had shoved the broken table aside and stumbled after them. Marshall stood at the threshold, staring at the empty room. The door behind him groaned. The creature was gone. Lena was gone. "No," he whispered. He stepped forward, but the door slammed shut in his face. He punched it. "Lena!" No answer, only silence. Lucian's voice returned, almost pitying. "Time's up." The stillness claimed what it was owed. Marshall dropped to his knees, staring at the wood as if he could will it to open. His breath came ragged. The others just stood in the room. No one said anything. Where the door had slammed shut, where Lena had vanished into the belly of the mansion, a small brass plaque had appeared, elegant and cold. None of them saw it appear, but there it was now, gleaming in the dim light, freshly affixed to the wall. Marshall rose to his feet slowly, like something heavier than grief was pressing down on his shoulders. His breath shook as he stepped forward and read the inscription aloud, voice hoarse. "Lena Muriel Hart, claimed by Sloth, for rest that was not earned." He didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't say a word. Scarlet stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Marshall." He shrugged her off, not roughly, but with a hollowness that said there was nothing anyone could give him right now. Not understanding, not comfort, not forgiveness. Isabel looked away, clenching her jaw in the process. Remy wiped his face with his sleeve, not even sure if he was sweating or crying. Maybe both. Scarlet didn't bother hiding her tears. The room they'd entered was different from all the others, quiet in a way that didn't feel like menace. Not yet. Curtains of dark velvet draped a small stage at the far end. Before it, a row of cushioned chairs, arranged with reverence. Above the stage, something stirred, a low hum, the distant tuning of unseen strings. No plaque, no rules, no Lucian, just the stage. "Another trick?" Scarlet asked, narrowing her eyes. "Of course it is," Isabel said. "Everything in this place is." But even as she said it, she sat down, warily. Scarlet hesitated, then sat beside her, grumbling. "If this is the lull before the next nightmare, I'd rather meet it sitting than sprawled on the floor." Remy joined them. Only Marshall remained standing. He didn't move an inch. Whatever was about to begin, Marshall would face it on his feet. The crimson curtain parted with a silken sigh, revealing a miniature stage bathed in golden flickering light. A marionette descended from above, its wooden limbs twitching, painted face set in a fixed expression of terror. Another puppet joined it, then another, until there were 7 of them. The show began with a jaunty, off-kilter tune, played on invisible instruments. The puppets danced, jerky and grotesque, reenacting with horrifying precision scenes that felt eerily familiar. A puppet grasped for a floating apple above its head, only for a monstrous hand to descend and crush it in its grip. The second puppet gorged at a table, grabbing plate after plate, until the feast itself turned and he was dragged screaming into its gluttonous belly. A third cackled as he counted coins, stacking them high until the weight of his tower collapsed and crushed him beneath it. The fourth puppet gazed longingly into a mirror that cracked and bled until it swallowed him whole. The fifth did nothing, just sat, until a shadow crept up behind him and ripped him away into the dark. A sixth was lured into the arms of a seductive, shifting creature made of ribbons and teeth. And then, in the final scene, the remaining puppet stood tall on a pedestal, pointing at all the others with a sneer, until it turned to stone, frozen forever in its final smug gesture. Scarlet leaned forward, arms wrapped tightly around her chest. This is what happened to the ones before us. Lucian's trophies, Isabel murmured. Remy stared at the stage, pale. He's showing us how it ends, he said softly. And in the silence that followed, the marionette still twitched, as if the strings hadn't been cut, just slackened. The curtains fell, not with flare, but with indifference, as if the mansion itself had grown tired of the spectacle. But it wasn't over. From beneath the stage, with a mechanical whir and grinding of stone, rose 7 statues, lifelike in the most terrible way. Every inch of them caught in a moment that no one should ever be remembered by. Twisted mouths, pleading hands, shoulders bowed in pain or defiance. Not art, not tribute. Execution in stillness. Each had a plaque, gleaming like a gravestone. Derek Holloway, Lust. Mirabelle's son, Gluttony. Gustave Easton, Grieve. Pabardi Raja, Envy. Tyler North, Sloth. Tomas Verelli, Wrath. Elise Fontaine, Pride. 7 sins, 7 victims. Remy backed away. They're real, he breathed. Those were real people. Isabel let out a sharp breath. And we're next. Scarlet didn't argue. She looked at each of the statues in turn, then at the remaining 4 of them. This is our warning, she said quietly. He's not hiding it anymore. Remy couldn't look away from Tomas's statue, how the eyes were cast downward, how his hand was reaching for something unseen. He looked more lost than angry. A man cut off mid-thought? Mid-life? We're not going to survive this, are we? He asked, barely above a whisper. No one gave him an answer. Marshall hadn't moved. He stood in the back, still staring at the plaque with Lena's name, as though nothing else mattered, as though the stone was speaking only to him. The mansion creaked. The stage lights didn't dim as much as they retracted, pulled into some invisible cavity above. The floor parted in the center. False planks folded inward, revealing a descending stairway carved from black stone. At its base, a single red door, breathing faint light from the cracks around its frame. They stared hesitantly. Then Marshall moved without a word. He strode down the steps, like a man who had already made peace with the end. Marshall, wait, Remy called. Don't! Stop! Scarlet shouted. He didn't stop. The door yawned open before him, as if expecting him. And then he was gone. By the time Remy, Scarlet, and Isabel caught up and stepped through the doorway, they were already too late. The next room was dark, lit only by a circle of hanging bulbs swinging from above. Within that circle, chaos. Marshall was on top of someone. It took them no more than a second to notice it was Lucian. His fine clothes were torn, his face bloodied, bruised from where Marshall's fist landed again and again. The sickening crack of knuckle against bone echoed through the chamber. "Marshall!" Isabel shouted. "Stop it!" Scarlet cried. Lucian looked up at them, dazed and gasping. His voice cracked as he held a hand toward the group. "Please, help me." Marshall didn't stop. His face was red, wild, not with hate, but with grief. "You took her," he roared. "You smug bastard, you took her from me." Each punch became more vicious than the last. Blood splattered, bones split, teeth scattered across the floor. "Stop," Scarlet begged. "You don't know what you're doing." Lucian coughed, choking on the blood. "Please, no more." Then he whimpered. And then he snapped his fingers. The sound echoed like a detonation. Reality shattered. Marshall's fist struck flesh again, but it wasn't Lucian beneath him anymore. It was Lena. Her broken face, her wide, lifeless eyes, her limp form beneath his fist. Marshall reeled back as if burned, hands slick with blood. Her blood. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." He fell to his knees, clutching his head. The room shifted around them. The circle of light expanded to reveal carvings etched into the stone walls. The rule they hadn't seen before now slowly revealed itself, glowing red. "Do not strike that which does not strike you, no matter how deep your wound." The silence that followed was unbearable. Remy, Scarlet, and Isabel stared, frozen. Speechless, Marshall was a trembling wreck on the floor, rocking slightly, whispering her name like it might undo what he'd done. "Lena. Lena." Lucian's voice rang from all sides, though his body was nowhere in sight. "Ah, wrath," he sighed, satisfied. So easy to light in a grieving man, so easy to dress as justice. He thought vengeance would be his salvation, but it was his noose. The lights dimmed steadily, like a curtain drawing shut. When they flared again, Marshall was gone. Not a scream, not a sound. Just gone. Where he had been, where the blood had once pooled, now stood a plaque which read, "Marshall Victor Holloway, struck, but did not strike him." Remy just stared, his breath barely there. Scarlet turned her head away, her eyes glassy. Isabel didn't move. None of them spoke. The air shifted, and Lucian stepped out from the gloom as if he'd always been a part of the room's shadows. "Well," he said, brightly, clapping once. "That was efficient. Almost too efficient, really." He tilted his head toward the plaque, admiring it like a finished painting. "I barely had time to take notes." No one answered. He pouted. Now, don't get quiet on me. You've made it this far. That's something to celebrate. Only 3 left. And as every playwright knows," he winked, "the final act needs a smaller cast." He twirled, looking toward the far wall as the stone began to tremble and groan. The very bones of the mansion shivered and shifted. Bricks peeled back like petals. A door was forming, slowly, agonizingly slow. Unfortunately, the room is still being arranged. You see, Marshall's little outburst accelerated things. This room was supposed to take longer. He turned back to them with a smile too wide to be anything but a threat. "So, let's chat, shall we?" Scarlet lit a cigarette with trembling fingers. "What is there to say, Lucian?" "Oh, so much, darling." He floated a little closer, eyes glimmering like stars dipped in ink. "You're all so interesting, so flawed, but determined. That's rare. Most people break far earlier than this." "We're not most people," Isabel muttered, arms crossed tightly across their chest. Lucian's grin widened, impossibly wide. "No, you're not." He leaned in, low and serpentine. "You're much, much more fun." And with slow delight, he began to circle them. like a predator indulging its meal. Remy's voice sliced through the tension. Why us? Lucian stopped. For a moment, the smile slipped. Then it returned, smaller this time, less teeth. Because you came, he said simply. That's all it ever takes. The wall behind them finally clicked, the door now fully formed. It was grander than the others. Polished obsidian, inlaid with gold filigree and twisting, spiraling patterns. Lucian sighed. Well, our final room awaits, but I must warn you, this one's personal. Pride always is. He looked at them, his tone suddenly somber. Only the honest come out the other side. And with that, he stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. Shall we? They stepped through the dark threshold side by side. Remy, Isabel, and Scarlet moving with the wary weight of grief and exhaustion behind every breath. But the moment they crossed the threshold, everything shifted. The air fractured around them, like glass catching the wrong light. The floor didn't tilt, didn't fall, yet somehow when they looked around, they were no longer together. Remy blinked. Scarlet? Gone. Isabel? Gone. In their place, a room that looked like a memory, like shame, like home. The old wallpaper from his childhood bedroom peeling in the same corners. The scratchy rug from his college dorm. His childhood trophies lined up on a shelf, participation awards, none of them first place. On the far wall stood a mirror, plain, unforgiving, etched into its glass in blood-colored script. Do not place your truth above all others. Pride is the voice that shouts the loudest when no one is listening. Remy frowned, didn't understand, until the room spoke. A voice like thunder under the floorboards. His father. Your sister just gets it. You coast. His mother, softer but cutting. Stop pretending the world owes you something. Maybe then you'd get somewhere. The mirror rippled. Photos bloomed across its surface like bruises. His sister draped in medals, smiles, trophies, success. And then the voicemail, cruel in its finality. We love you, Remy, but we're done waiting for you to grow up. She's what we hoped you'd be. Let it go. He stumbled back, shaking his head. In the corner of the room, the mirror rippled then split. From it stepped another Remy, standing straighter, more confident, a perfect version of himself, the kind of man who never flinched, never wavered. The man thought he could be if the world had just seen him right. That Remy smiled, like he was privy to something that the other Remy wasn't. It's not fair, is it? His voice was Remy's voice, only steadier. You tried. You worked. You just didn't shine like her. So why shouldn't you say it? Why shouldn't you believe you deserve more? Remy's fists clenched. I didn't. You did. You do. That's why it hurts. You're not angry because they're wrong. You're angry because they're right. You're just not enough. And you can't stand it. That's the truth you don't want to admit. The mirror Remy held out a hand, but I can help you carry it. We can become the version they wanted. Better. Stronger. If we stop feeling sorry for ourselves. He hesitated. The mirror behind him pulsed faintly, heartbeat-like. Remy looked at himself, then at the offered hand. Lucian's voice, calm and detached, came from somewhere above. You know, pride isn't always about arrogance. Sometimes it's the refusal to admit you're broken. That's the worst kind of pride, the kind that whispers you're the victim, even when you bleed yourself dry, proving you're not. The mirror Remy smiled, reassuring, patient, hungry. Remy's hand rose. The lights dimmed. Elsewhere, Isabel's room was nothing like Remy's. It wasn't warm. It wasn't familiar. It was white, clinical, bright, humming faintly with sterile light, like a hospital that had forgotten it's supposed to help people. She stood alone in the center of the room. No door behind her, just walls, smooth and seamless. The floor glistened like polished bone. Then the light dimmed just slightly, and a panel on one wall slid open with a hiss. A chair emerged, familiar in a way she didn't want to acknowledge. And in that chair sat a woman. Wrists bound, head tilted forward, breathing but barely. Isabel didn't have to see her face. Lucian's voice slithered through the silence. "Isabel O'Connor," he purred, strong, cunning, defiant. "You wear your pride like armor, don't you? Forged in fire, tempered in neglect. When no one came, when the world spat, you stood." She turned slowly. "This isn't real." Lucian chuckled. "Oh, but it is. You don't get to lie here, Isabel. Not to me and not to yourself." The lights above the chair buzzed brighter, illuminating bruises on her mother's arms, her temple. An oxygen mask hung just out of reach, swaying gently from a hook. Another chair slid out from the wall across from her. Another version of Isabel stepped into the room from the opposite side, but not as she was, as she presented. Hair slicked back, lips painted, eyes sharp enough to draw blood. That Isabel crossed the room in high heels that didn't echo, and stared her down like a verdict. "You know what she did," the reflection said flatly. "You remember. The nights, the screams, the stares, the ribs. She leaned in. You swore she'd never touch you again." Isabel stayed silent. The mirror Isabel took a step forward. "You think forgiveness makes you soft, weak. You think letting go means she wins. But you've been carrying her your whole life. You think that's strength?" Isabel said nothing. She couldn't. A screen blinked on the wall, footage from a childhood Isabel hadn't dared to revisit. A small girl hiding in closets, bandaging her own bruises, silently eating dinner while her mother drank and slurred through apologies she never remembered. Lucian's voice grew soft now. "You built your pride out of that wreckage. Shaped yourself like a blade. You told the world you didn't need saving, because needing meant weakness. And weakness meant her." The oxygen mask slipped from its hook and clattered to the floor. The woman in the chair stirred, reached for it with curled fingers that never made contact. "Mirror," Isabel stared. "So, help her, or don't, but understand this. What you do now, that defines you, not her." Isabel didn't move. Her eyes burned, her nails dug into her palms. Her breath came fast. "I'm not going to let you make me feel guilty for surviving," she whispered. "But is surviving the same as healing?" Lucian asked, a lilt to his voice. "Or is your pride just a mask you stitched over the wound so no one would see how deep it went?" She dropped her gaze, took one step forward, then two. The lights dimmed. Elsewhere still, Scarlett's room was unlike the others. It opened not with grandeur, but with a soft sigh. The air inside was velvet, not metaphorically, literally. Crimson velvet lined the walls, so plush it seemed to swallow sound. The light glowed low and golden, like candlelight reflected in red wine. A chaise lounge waited at the center, angled just right. Beside it, a crystal ashtray, a half-empty glass of something dark and expensive, and her favorite brand of cigarettes already open. It was too perfect. She didn't trust it for a second, and still she stepped forward. The moment her heel touched the floor, a spotlight bloomed across the room. It landed on a vanity mirror, and in it, her. Not just a reflection, but the performance. Scarlett as the world knew her. Eyeliner sharp enough to wound. A Mona Lisa smirk. Elegance, draped like armor. She looked untouchable. Curated even. Lucian's voice echoed faintly. "Scarlett Monroe," he drawled. "A woman who turned her scars into sequins. Bravo." A queen of reinvention, of presentation, of misdirection. She said nothing. "But tell me," he murmured, "after so many performances, do you even remember who you were before the costume?" The mirror shimmered, and her reflection changed. Not dramatically, subtly. Her lipstick smeared, eyes red-rimmed, jaw clenched like she was holding back a scream. It wasn't her on a bad day. It was her when no one was looking. When everything cracked beneath the surface. A version she never showed, not even to herself. This wasn't weakness. This was private. The reflection stood. It moved independently, each motion echoing her own, but just behind. It walked toward her from inside the glass. It didn't speak aloud. It didn't need to. You don't let people close. You use them, push them away. You end things first because if they see too much, they'll leave anyway. A second spotlight ignited. There, at the edge of the room, stood a girl, 17, hair cropped, jagged short, shoulders hunched beneath a borrowed jacket, clutching a duffel bag like it held all the worth she had left. Her eyes were fire and betrayal and the aching need to be wanted. Scarlett knew that face, because she wore it once, when the last foster door had slammed shut behind her. That girl stepped forward, voice barely audible through the weight in the air. Why wasn't I enough? Scarlett stumbled back a step. The wine glistened. The mirror beckoned. A return to stillness, to beauty, to forgetting. Lucian's voice slipped back into the room. This isn't shame, Scarlett. It's truth. Your pride became your fortress, your stage. But somewhere in the silence, you forgot how to feel without performing. He paused. And that's how the rot begins. A final choice presented itself. The mirror, the wine, the version of herself that could close her eyes and pretend none of it ever mattered. Or the girl, raw, needing. Scarlett stared between the two. The lights began to flicker, and then darkness. Lucian stood alone, the firelight from the hearth casting golden ribbons across the dark wood floors. He leaned against a sleek marble table, swirling the last of his wine in a crystal glass. His expression was unreadable, something between amusement and expectation. He had waited here many times before, and not once had the door opened. A perfect record, a flawless game. Another batch of mortals swallowed by their own vices, by his beautiful, intricate design. He could already feel the satisfaction rising in his chest, smug and curling like smoke. He took a final sip of his wine and set the glass down with a soft clink. Silence. He gave it a beat longer just in case. Then he sighed, slow and content, and turned away. Click. The latch. The door creaked open. Lucian stopped mid-step. The door behind him, the door that never opened, creaked wide on its own. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, spine straightening, head tilting with a slow, almost feline tension. His eyes narrowed, not in fear, not yet, but something colder, disbelief. His lips curled, not into a smile, but the shape of one, all suggestion and no sincerity. Remy stepped through. His face was pale, hollowed by exhaustion, but his eyes, they burned with clarity, with resolve, with something changed. Lucian blinked once, then twice. "Well," he murmured, voice taut. "That's new." Remy said nothing at first, just stood there, breathing in the heavy air of the final chamber. The same room where Lucian had toasted every victory, the same room where the doors had never opened from the other side. Lucian stepped forward, slow and measured. His gaze sharpened. "You're alone," he noted. "You made it through the test. Your test." He studied him carefully, tilting his head. "Nobody's ever made it through all 7. Still," Remy said nothing. Lucian's expression twitched, barely, the faintest flicker of a fracture. How? He asked. The word was smaller than expected, almost reluctant. Then again, softer. You shouldn't be standing here. Remy lifted his gaze, meeting Lucian's with something heavier than defiance. I know. Lucian's jaw tightened. What did you give up? He asked. The question brittle with something more than suspicion now. Remy looked at him. Nothing I didn't need to. And then he stepped further into the room, past the line no one had ever crossed. Lucian took a step back. For the first time, he wasn't in control. Lucian took a step back from Remy, his expression unreadable. There was confusion there, yes, but also the beginnings of something else. Then, click. Lucian's head whipped toward the door, his eyes widened. No, he whispered, no. The door opened again. Isabel stepped through, her jacket torn, skin bruised, blood darkening one sleeve. But her chin was raised, her eyes fierce and clean. Alive. Lucian dropped his glass. It shattered against the marble. You, he started, then faltered. He looked between them, like the room had tilted on its axis. This isn't how it's supposed to go. Isabel leaned against the wall, catching her breath. Guess you're slipping, Lucian. He turned away from them, furious and rattled, pacing like a trapped beast. Remy looked at Isabel. She gave a tired nod. Remy and Isabel stood near the center of the room, both watching the door. It sat like a final question mark, a possibility they didn't dare give up on. Minutes passed. Lucian said nothing, his eyes flickering to it as well. But it didn't open. No sound, no footstep, no hint of motion behind the wood. Scarlet never came through. Lucian exhaled, slow and bitter. Well, he said at last, not all miracles come in threes. Relief curled across his face, subtle at first, but growing. He ran a gloved hand down the front of his coat, smoothing invisible creases with practiced elegance. One of you fell, he murmured, almost to himself. As they always do. That's the balance. That's how this works. Isabel didn't move. She only stared at the door. Remy, still breathing a little heavier than normal, turned his eyes on Lucian. You sound like you're trying to convince yourself of that. Lucian twitched, just slightly, like someone flinching from a strike they almost didn't see coming. His expression soured, composure fracturing at the edges. It is how it works, he snapped. You don't understand the symmetry, the elegance of it, the design. Every fall, every test, every rule, it all fits. That's what makes it beautiful. Beautiful? Isabel's voice was ragged, scraped raw, but it hit like a flint. This is what that means to you? A stage play? A perfectly choreographed tragedy? Lucian tilted his head like a man explaining art to someone who refused to see it. Everything I've done had purpose. More than you realize. Remy stepped forward. Then tell me, what was the purpose behind Scarlet dying alone? Lucian's mouth curled into something bitter. She gave in, like the rest. You didn't see it. But you did? Isabel said, softly but deadly. Lucian hesitated just long enough to answer the question without speaking. Yes, he said finally. Remy's voice cut sharper than before. And you're proud of that, aren't you? There, a flicker. Not pride, not power. Guilt. Buried fast, but not well. This was never meant to be easy, Lucian said quickly. The house, it demands truth. And the truth is, people fall. That's what they do. He gestured, vaguely, as if the words refused to form properly. You too. Your anomalies. Exceptions. He said it like a curse, like it offended him to admit it. Maybe you broke the pattern, but even now, you're still waiting, still hoping the door opens, still dreaming she made it through, so you don't have to carry her. Remy's throat tightened. He didn't deny it. Lucian glanced at the door, then down, muttering, this wasn't supposed to happen. The walls of the room shifted, almost imperceptibly. The mansion wasn't sure what came next. Neither was Lucian. Neither were they. A sound cracked through the room like bones splitting under weight. A smooth stone plaque slid from the wall opposite of the sealed doors. Slow and deliberate. It thudded into place where Scarlet might have emerged, carved in elegant, curling script. Scarlet Lavinia Moore believed herself unbreakable. Remy lowered his head. Isabel didn't look away from the name. They stood in silence, a hush that felt like mourning. No music, no smirk from Lucian, only the quiet sting of a loss made permanent. She deserved better, Isabel murmured. She gave it everything, Remy said. Lucian stared at the plaque longer than he meant to. Something twitched in his jaw. A tell. A crack in the marble. Fine, he said, voice low. You made it this far. The rules were set. I'm not in the habit of breaking them. He looked at them. Then really looked. Not like prey. Not like pawns. Like people. His eyes lingered on their faces as if searching for signs he might still control the narrative. But the cracks he expected weren't there. You've earned your freedom. He turned and the house listened, as it always did. At the back of the room, where a wall had stood moments ago, the structure shifted. With a groan like ancient wood stirring from sleep, the surface peeled open, curling back in layered ridges like bark revealing the heart of a tree. A passage opened, thin. Gray light spilled in, but it was light. Lucian hesitated. Just for a breath. Remy and Isabel looked at each other. No words passed between them. They didn't need any. Together, the three of them stepped forward. Lucian walked without his old swagger. Lucian moved with heavy steps, not the arrogance he once wore like a cloak, but doubt. Together, the three of them passed through the threshold. The corridor curved. They followed its twisting path, shadows flickering along the walls until the space widened, and they were standing in the entrance hall, exactly as it had been when they first arrived. Only now sunlight broke faintly through the stained glass above the door, unmistakably morning. Remy inhaled deeply, as if rediscovering how. Isabel moved first. She walked to the great front door and pressed her hand to it. No resistance, no tricks. It opened like it had never been locked, and the world beyond it, real. Lucian lingered behind them, hand resting on the banister. He didn't move. Remy turned to him. Aren't you coming? Lucian looked up. For the first time, there was no smirk on his lips, no menace behind his eyes. Just weariness, old and deep. This place doesn't let go of me, he said quietly. I made the rules, but I was always just another piece on the board. He gestured at the mansion behind him, its halls echoing with ghosts and silence. Isabel didn't speak. She held the door open for Remy. They stepped into the light together. And outside, the world struck them like a forgotten memory. Clean air. A pale sun just cresting the trees. The sound of birdsong. Leaves moving in the wind. Not the hush of dread. Not whispering walls. Just life. At the end of the gravel path, a long, black car sat, waiting. Its polished surface shimmered like oil beneath the early light. A driver stood beside it, crisp in a black suit, cap low over his brow, hands folded neatly in front of him. As they approached, He nodded once and opened the door without a word. They exchanged one last look, quiet and wordless, then stepped inside. The car was impossibly quiet, not just silent, sealed, as though the noise of the world had been left behind with the house, shut out like a storm they'd finally outrun. Plush leather seats hugged their bodies. The air was tinged with something rich and distant. Sandalwood, maybe, or the memory of it. Neither spoke for a while. They didn't need to. It was enough to sit, to breathe, to be. The mansion faded behind them, first the gate, then the hedgerow, then the last of its black spires dissolving into the morning like smoke off of a dying candle. Then Remy spoke, voice low, more thought than question. "You think it's really over?" Isabel didn't answer at first. Her fingers twisted a strand of hair absently, as if grounding herself. "I think we got out." He nodded. "But not everyone." "No," she said, softer now. "Not everyone." The silence that followed wasn't hollow. It was full of what they'd seen, what they'd done, what they'd left behind. Outside, the world returned to itself. Fields turned to fences, fences to neighborhoods. The city crept back into focus, slow and surreal, like waking from a dream with a bruise you can't explain. Eventually the car slowed, then stopped. They looked out, a city street, clean, ordinary. A dog barked. A couple laughed near a cafe. Horns in the distance, pedestrians scrolling on phones, as if none of it had cracked, as if reality had simply resumed. The driver stepped out and opened the door for them. They emerged slowly, blinking into the pale light. The air smelled like spring. Concrete and new blossoms, the trace of gasoline. The driver reached into his coat. From it, he withdrew a single card, small and ivory colored. He handed it to Remy and gave a slight, respectful tip of the hat. Then he turned without another glance, stepped into the car, and pulled away. He was gone before the next red light. Remy looked down. The card was thick, expensive stock. The edges beveled, gold script curling and immaculate across the front. "Lucian Vale cordially invites you back for another dinner." He flipped it over, blank. Remy's fingers tightened around the card. Isabel stared ahead. Her voice was quiet, but sure. "Burn it." And that is all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed the story, and I want to give a quick shout out again to my friend for letting me use and narrate yet another one of his stories. Until next time. You've been listening to Don't Whistle to the Wind, and as the tale ends, the candles have burned down to nothing, and the salt lines we drew have surely failed as the shadows have crept in. Don't let them catch you, and don't turn off the light.